World of Warcraft is a game about combat. And, when we think about combat, one of the fighter archetypes that you think about is the kung fu artist, the martial artist. I mean, it's just a natural for a game that has combat at its center. And obviously the Pandaren, that's the place we're going to do kung fu. So there was almost no question when we decided to do this expansion that we were going to do monks. We were going to have a martial artist class because that's what the fighting is all about.
To be honest, I don't think there was really much debate at all going into Pandaria that the monk was going to be the new class.
As we talked about the monk, it's kind of the new class. It was just kind of a no-brainer.
If you look back at doing Northrend, Wrath of the Lich King, there was a lot of discussion about the Death Knight, if that was going to be the class. And we really went right up to the end on that before we picked the Death Knight. But really here, once we knew we were doing Pandaria, the monk just stood out as it would be the perfect class to do for this expansion.
Yeah, the monk is a martial arts-based class, and so our backstory for them is with some parallels to the real world. The Pandaren at the time were being oppressed by these ogre-like creatures we call the Mogu, and the Pandaren wanted to rise up against their oppressors, but of course they weren't allowed weapons or things like that, so they developed martial arts as a way of fighting back. It kind of evolved naturally from dance and Tai Chi-like exercises that the monks would do, and they developed this fighting style that helped them to eventually overthrow the Mogu warlords and kind of kick them off of the continent.
We want it to be a very visceral, kind of action-y, one of our more action-y kind of feeling races. We also decided fairly early on that we wanted to have, a DPS, a healer, and a tank kind of spec for them to participate in.
We felt the gameplay associated with these modes just felt exactly right. It was a nice contrast, a little more clicky, a little more directed player control than previous other classes, and it just felt like exactly the right idea to run with.
Of course, we have a lot of different melee classes in the game. We have the warrior, we've got the death knight, we've got the rogue, which is probably the most similar to the monk. But it's very important for us that the monk have a very different feel. And so while the rogue is all about sneaking around and backstabbing and doing dastardly stuff, the monk is really much more up in your face. There's a lot of movement involved. So it ends up feeling very different.
Everybody's scheming to which character they're going to devote to that, which one they're going to throw over into monk so that they can go fight. I predict there'll be a lot of fist fights in the game right away.
What's funny is that as we developed Warcraft over time, especially the Pandaren kit over time, kind of started with brewmasters, right? Shen Sormstout was, this brewmaster, he has a big keg over his shoulder.
Once you say Pandaren and monk at the same time, it's like, okay, now a lot of the things are going to kind of start to come together as a kit to actually make sense, So the Pandaren Brewmaster, that's something that's kind of a signature piece within the World of Warcraft universe, and so one of the trees ends up being the Brewmaster tree.
Their love of beer and of brewing is one of the core parts of Pandaren culture, but we decided to focus on the Brewmaster as specifically a tank spec, in terms of they're the stout, hardy monk tank.
The DPS melee spec is called the Windwalker. They kind of emphasize fast movements and getting across the battlefield and punching someone in the face. And then they have a healer, which is called the Mistweaver. And the healer heals primarily by manipulating the spiritual world and the outer world, and also with the wise medicine persona.
The healers are a little more traditional. They have mana, but they're still up in the front, kicking and punching and doing their thing. A lot of location-style healing, a lot of target this guy, and there's an area effect of heal. There's a lot of just really cool, interesting mechanics coming with the monk.
Almost every race can be a monk. Our fiction there is that as the Horde and the Alliance have discovered Pandaria, the Pandaren themselves have kind of spread through the rest of the world and started educating everyone from humans to Forsaken and how to be a monk. At the time, only Worgen and Goblin can't be a monk. That may be something we revisit in the future. Partially, that was due to the way we told their stories, which kind of happened in the past, so there wasn't a great opportunity for the Pandaren to show up many years ago in Gilneas. And partially, we thought it didn't fit the flavor of those races. The Worgen are very feral and primal and bestial and not really known for their inner focus. And the same is true of the goblins. They're more about manipulating the system rather than kind of being one with nature. We know that this is not a class where players expect to see a lot of really flashy spell effects, and for the most part, we didn't want them using a lot of really gigantic weapons. So that meant that to make monks feel cool and to look awesome in combat, they needed a lot of really different animations.
Really looking up front at kung fu movies and different martial arts styles, and we have people on the team who are really into martial arts. And looking at that stuff, we realized that we wanted to make it so that when you see it, even if, whether you're a martial arts pro or you've never seen this stuff before, it feels right to you. You don't go like, well, that's like somebody's just making some stuff up and trying to make it work. So the biggest thing for us was, how do we take what exists and use the pieces that'll keep it identifiable, but add, like anything, the WoW spin to it, so it's our own martial arts style. The monk is its own thing.
It's been really difficult trying to get the same animations onto all the player races. We've transferred them onto each race and gender, and we go in and carefully polish those animations because sometimes the transfers don't come in as clean. This is like the first time we've actually provided animations for a class, whereas all the other animations that we have in game are for all classes. So this one was a little trickier because we had to be very careful as to, okay, they gotta look really good on all of the player races. So we try to make sure that when we're putting it on the character, that it still feels like you have an undead character. They're hunched over a bit. So we try to keep that hunched look on them, because if we don't, then they look more human. We definitely make sure that we're very careful with each race.
So when it came to doing the monks, we really figured out that we usually have a few effects, a few animations that we add for a new class, just to give it flavor and really help them stand apart from a lot of the other classes that we've done in the past.
From our standpoint, for the effects, this is the first time where it's really focused on hand-to-hand combat, martial arts. And so our job is to come up with effects that go along with everything that they do. If it's a flying kick, is there a big dragon flying along with them? Yes, there is. Giving a visual language to how they fight, it's a lot of work and a lot of figuring out, and everybody knew they wanted it to be awesome, but what awesome looks like is pretty subjective. So it's been a long job figuring out what they'll look like. What's not going to be too much in your face when you're in a dungeon with 500 other pandas and they're all fighting and you've got all this effects flying in your face. So it's a balance that we're also trying to strike.
Even as kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, the monk was always one of the really fun classes, right? Just evoked, at once the idea of this very serene, wise, holy man kind of thing with just all the badassness of like Bruce Lee, Kung Fu, just hyper dynamic combat. I mean, you put those two flavors together, with the strong sense for adventure, and it's just a really compelling character kit.
New classes are really exciting. We know a lot of players. Gives them a good chance to come back. Gives them a chance to roll a low-level Pandaran because now they have a new class they can try it at the same time. Shakes things up a little bit, which I think helps to keep it fresh.
I really hope that players who roll up on a monk get to feel really much more engaged in the combat, really standing toe-to-toe and just really able to fight creatures in a new kind of cool way. I think if players kind of really feel that the combat is fast and fun with a lot of exciting decisions to make about your abilities, that we've succeeded with the monk class.
So a challenge mode is the concept of doing a dungeon with a timer.
Essentially the incorporation of the idea of time trials into the world of Warcraft.
The idea is to complete the dungeon as fast as possible. It's a race.
Challenge mode version of the dungeon, it says, we are going to pit our expertise at doing this dungeon against everybody else. This is a completely level playing field, and you just gotta go.
Imagine you've already done this dungeon a number of times. You know the layout pretty good, killed all the bosses. The next thing for you to do really is to figure out how quick can you do the dungeon. I think most players feel like that's what kind of happens inherently. They decide, I want to do however many dungeons tonight. The faster I do them, the more I can get.
And so we use that as an inspiration. We really realize that it can be a lot of fun to have time pressure, something that you ordinarily do, right? Like going through a dungeon. It can completely transform the experience to have time pressure associated with it, where you've got to do it in a hurry.
You can beat the dungeon in heroic mode, but can you beat the dungeon in 15 minutes?
Suddenly you start playing differently, right? You start taking risks that you wouldn't ordinarily take. In a dungeon, you might start to pull multiple groups at the same time. It becomes very important to make sure that you don't have anybody die, because that really slows you down, right? It goes beyond just the inconvenience of dying. We
have to move through this as fast as possible. We have to clear, we have to kill the boss, we have to find neat ways of creating efficiencies as we play the game.
You won't get loot from challenge modes. There's no stopping for loot, so there's none of that. Anybody who's done the Amani Warbear remembers the drama of, but I want to loot, but we got 15 seconds, go, 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 go.
The concept here that we're really kind of trying to get to is competitive PvE.
This is kind of us dipping our toe into competitive PvE, which is something we haven't done a lot before. It's very important to the community. We want to have leaderboards for challenge modes so you can compare yourself to your friends.
Where you'll be able to look at your guildmates and your friends' scores and their best times on each of the individual dungeons. And for the really hardcore, really competitive folks, we'll have realm-wide or region-wide leaderboards even.
An important aspect about challenge modes is that they're based on skill. They're not based on item progression that you might have done up to this point. So because of that, we're normalizing the gear across the board. What that essentially means is that when you enter the dungeon, we're deciding what the item level is that's appropriate for this dungeon, and we set all your gear to that level.
The real interesting part is the first thing that any meleeer is going to say is, oh my goodness, you can't take away my expertise in hit. I'm specifically crafted my character so that I have exactly the hit and expertise I need. Guess what? We're going to be smart about it and not reduce those stats. We know the stats you want. We know the stats you need. For example, in the case of expertise and hit, say you've got some extra crit lying around. We're going to take the points away from crit so that it's balanced, so that the people who don't care about hit, like say your healers, they'll just get reduced overall, pretty much straight across the board. Whereas like the casters who need a certain percentage of hit, we know that number. We'll make sure you get there, assuming you're there. We're not going to give you hit. We call it a smart stat reduction. We'll just reduce your stats accordingly.
So everyone's on an even playing field at that point. It really just comes down to how quick can you kill everything and get that final time. So when you're doing this content 3 patches down the line, you're still going to be at the same power level. Now, granted, your skill will probably increase, which means times will be getting quicker, but it's not going to be based on your gear. It's going to be based on your skill.
As we're looking at it, we really realize that, the level of difficulty of something like this can vary greatly depending on the player. So you'll have players that are top-notch PvE professionals practically that'll blast through and they'll optimize every single little different part of it. And you'll have your other more casual players that will go through it and they'll still be pressured by it and it'll transform their gameplay. But at the same time, we have to be able to reward them too, right? So we look at this concept and we start to realize that it lends itself very well to prestige rewards, cosmetic rewards, that kind of stuff.
There will be gold, silver, and bronze rewards based on how quickly you run the dungeon. And there'll be different rewards for the various badges that you get for completing those levels.
Things like titles, new mounts, cosmetic, amazing armor that looks like nothing any player has ever seen before. Some of the best stuff of artists have ever done.
Let's say that it's the silver medal. The first time you get a silver medal, you might earn your boots from your challenge mode armor. And the second time you get a silver medal on a different dungeon, now you get your shoulders. And eventually, if you can get silver in every single one of these dungeons, you'll have this full epic armor set. And they really are some of the best armor our artists have ever done.
When the designers came to us and said, okay, we have this idea, we're going to do challenge modes, it's really not going to do anything other than give you the ability to show off the awesome stuff that you got for doing these challenge modes. And so we had that little moment of panic where we all went, yeah, I don't know how we're going to do this because we don't have any new tech really. We have belt buckles now, which is awesome. Ultimately, what they ended up doing was there's a series of effects that fire off with each one of these sets. So to give you an example, like the shaman set actually has totems that are part of the shoulders and they're animated. So there's little faces on them. So when you cast a certain spell or you laugh or emote roar, the little faces actually start to cackle and there's like fire that shoots out of the top of them and you're like a one-man fireworks show. The rogue set is, dragon themed, so when you do specific animations or this effects fire off, there's fire that like shoots out of the mouth of the dragon and burns your face off, which is a little bit over the top, but man, if it has to be special, that's where we're going to spend those pennies, and I think we did pretty well.
Now this armor has no stats on it at all. It is solely there to support the transmogrification feature. So you can imagine a really hardcore player goes and raids and gets their great epic gear from raiding, and then they also go do challenge modes and they get their awesome looking gear, and then they transmogrify their raid gear to look like the challenge mode gear. So when you see the shaman with these big shoulder pads, you're like, that dude's a badass.
We really took this concept of the time trials and have found a way to integrate it into WoW as a prestige, as really our first foray into competitive PvE.
We really feel like it's going to bring the concept back of doing a dungeon just with your friends or just with your guildmates. So I think we're excited that we're going to see that side of the game really re-emerge with challenge modes and really complement what we already have.
I'm assuming the feature is as awesome as we predict it's going to be. We'll continue to add additional challenge modes for other dungeons, And as players get better and better, we'll continue to offer higher and higher medals. So you can imagine, much the same way StarCraft eventually adds new brackets.
It's super, super cool, and it should be really exciting and sort of give a competitive element to the dungeon game, which hasn't really previously had that in the way that like the raid game or PvP have those distinct ways of preparing and saying, I'm the king of the hill, I'm the boss.
One of our goals with Mists of Pandaria was we really wanted to create a continent that had a whole like life, a whole ecosystem, a whole history and a sense of place of its own. So we really went back, like way back, cranked the Wayback Machine and tried to figure out what was happening in Pandaria when the Titans left, what was happening, 15,000 years ago.
Long ago, all the lands that we know and players have seen in Azeroth were all kind of part of Pangaea, right? It was all one big chunk of land. And in the very ancient times, the very, brutal, dark race known as the Mogu kind of ruled over this land.
The Mogu were a brutal race, and they enslaved and united Pandaria.
Just ruthlessly conquered the other races, unified the language. You can still see their ruins around the continent today, and you can also see some of their huge buildings that they built with slave labor. They still exist, big golden cities in the center of the continent. So you can still see their legacy.
The Great Wall is one of the big things that you'll see in Pandaria that was Mogu construction. The Vale of Eternal Blossoms, their most sacred place, is of Mogu construction as well.
So if we go back about 12,000 years ago, the Pandaren realized there was an opportunity as the Mogu regime was weakening. They thought, maybe we can actually get the other races together and we can actually have a revolution, overthrow these tyrants.
The Pandaren rose up against the Mogu Empire, and their uprising was actually pretty notable because it wasn't what you typically imagine, where everyone's got weapons and banded together this giant army. It was a group of monks.
All weapons are outlawed. These are all slave races. They're all subservient races. So they had to train in unarmed combat. They had to master how to fight with their fists and how to fight with just implements that farmers or craftsmen would have around, like quarterstaves or something. They were able to, in a long and bloody revolution, they were able to overthrow the Mogu, take over the kingdom, and that's sort of where the Pandaren Empire begins. But immediately they were beset by challenges from all over the world. So one of the principal villains, if we think 12,000 years ago, well, who was in charge in the world? The Zandalari trolls were kind of at the height of their empire in that time, and the Zandalari were allies of the Mogu. And as soon as the revolution happened, the Zandalari amassed their forces and invaded Pandaria in a big way. So the Pandaren found some really interesting ways to fight the trolls. They started befriending the cloud serpents and actually trained them to be mounts that they could ride these into combat against the trolls. And that helped turn the tide of the battle. That helped save the empire and push them back. To this day, the Order of the Cloud Serpent still exists. They still ride these dragons, and if players are smart and clever, they can befriend this order. They can actually train their own Cloud Serpent and ride their own mount with these ancient Pandaren heroes. So now we're looking like 10,000 years ago in Pandaren history, and 10,000 years ago, players might remember this very important event happened. The War of the Ancients happened, and that's when the Night Elves unleashed demons on Azeroth and opened a portal, and it was sort of the first Burning Legion invasion.
The Night Elves' rampant use of magic really just destroyed this Pangaea. Their actions resulted in this big, demonic invasion. The land was ripped asunder into the shape of the continents we know in the present day.
Well, the last Pandaren emperor was named Xiao, and most Pandaren emperors, they kind of expected long life, prosperous reign. That's what Xiao expected. So all Pandaren emperors begin their reign by go consult the Jinyu water speakers that can put a staff in the rivers, and they can talk to the rivers and hear the future. And at this time, the Jinyu looked into the waters and looked into the future and saw just devastation, the world just exploding, demons everywhere, the continents all shattered. And Xiao realized he had to do something. He had to step up. He had to save Pandaria from the end of the world. He found out that if he could cleanse himself, purify himself, become one with the land, he would have a way of saving Pandaria. So he proceeded on embarked on a quest to remove all his doubts and his fears and his anger and his hate, and he removed all those negative emotions from himself, kind of buried them in the earth where they're still a part of Pandaria today. He did become one with the land, and it's sort of at 0 hour, as the world was ending, he protected Pandaria. He wrapped it in a cloak of mist and broke the continent off and separated it from the world. And so when the Sundering hit and the rest of the world was shattered, the Pandaren Empire survived and was hidden by these mists, well, for 10,000 years. So he protected his continent, but it was isolated for all that time. And recently, as the curtain opens on the expansion, Mists of Pandaria, those mists collapse. Now, why did that happen? I don't know. That's part of the mystery we're going to figure out in the game. But after 10,000 years of isolation, now Pandaria is part of the world again. So there you have Pandaria. It's separated from the rest of the world by a veil of mist. The Pandarans, for thousands of years, pretty much thought that the rest of the world was destroyed in the Sundering. They thought they were the only thing out there.
Most Pandaran are they're content with their life. They're happy to be farmers. They're happy to brew and drink beer. They're happy to just sit around and hang out. They don't have a sense for wanting to have excitement and adventure. But every now and then there's a Pandaran who has a thirst for wanting to get out.
A rare breed of Pandaren, the kind of the explorer, comes about. And one Pandaren was named Lulang. He looked out over the oceans and he said, I bet there's something out there. I want to find out what's beyond the mists.
So we had the idea of taking one of the turtles off of southern Pandaria and raising it and riding out into the oceans on it.
Sea turtles can always find their way back home, so he knew he had a way back to Pandaria.
And the entire idea was just laughable to everyone in his village, to his family, and it was hard for them to even understand why he would possibly want to leave. There was beer here. There's no beer in the oceans. It doesn't make sense.
Got himself mounted up on this sea turtle and said goodbye to all his friends who all thought he was crazy, and he just sailed out into the oceans beyond the mist to see what was out there. And to Lulang's surprise, there's a whole world out there. He came back 5 years later. He says, you guys won't believe it. I found a great big desert. I found these 1,000 stone needles in a great canyon. I found this amazing, amazing stuff. And everyone thought Lulang was crazy. It's nothing out there. It was all destroyed. Like, it doesn't matter what you find out there. We're not interested.
They really just thought he was crazy. They didn't really get it. So he eventually left again and went on more adventures, came back, and the turtle was even bigger.
Every few years he'd come back, and every few years the turtle would be bigger. And it kind of became a thing. If you lived on Pandaria during the 10,000 years that it was cloaked in the mists, the sort of Pandaren who had the wanderlust would gather on the beaches, and they'd look out over the mists, and they'd wait for the turtle to come. And every few years, a few more people would join him on the back of the turtle. Pretty soon he had a little house on the back of the turtle, a little farm. Then he built a temple. As the turtle grew bigger, they built a little town. They got the brewmasters on board. They got the priests on board. They got the elements on board. Pretty soon, they had a whole kind of self-sufficient colony. And it was a self-selecting colony. It was a group of only the most boldest, sort of most adventurous Pandaren would go to the turtle.
And one day the turtle just doesn't come back. They have kind of a wandering island of their own, and there's no need for loneliness anymore. There's an entire group of Pandaren that are being raised there.
Now the turtle hasn't been back to Pandaria for many generations. It's almost like a legend that there was a homeland out there. So Lulang and the turtle adventured for many, many years together. And eventually Lulang was an old man, and he took his bamboo umbrella that had been with him since his early adventures, and said goodbye to the turtle. And he set down his umbrella in a forest at the top of the turtle, and leaned up against his umbrella and put his hat down over his head. And he fell asleep, and like the emperor of Pandaria, he became one with the land. He became one with the turtle. You can visit that site today. The umbrella has sprouted. It's become a tree. He's got a huge umbrella tree marking the place where Lulang passed away. Since that time, no one has spoken to the turtle, and the turtle has never returned to Pandaria. As a matter of fact, when the game opens, if you roll a new Pandaren, the turtle is having a crisis and no one knows why. You've got to speak to the turtle, and you will be the first person to talk to the turtle in generations.
Well, the tale starts many ages ago, on a dark and stormy night in the desert, actually. I was out there with some of my brothers. We were hanging out, having a couple storm stouts, you know. And for some reason, I had left the camp area. I wasn't near the fire. My buddy's all, "Hey, man, aren't you like..." He doesn't actually sound like that. I'm just making the voice. He says, "Aren't you cold?" I go, "No, I'm fat. I don't get cold." And he goes, "Dude, you're like one of those..." Again, that's not his voice. "You're like one of those panda bears, man." I'm like, "You mean polar bears?" He says, "No, you're a panda bear." And ever since then, I got stuck with that nickname, Panda. I guess because I'm hairy, but not that threatening. Anyways, flash forward years and years later, I had done a Christmas picture of a panda guy sitting on a hill with a young little cub on his shoulder. And that was in tribute to the birth of my daughter. And that was sort of the origins of the Pandaren. And I made that as a picture for my family. And somehow it made its way into work, probably because I brought it in to show some people. And people dug it. And then from then on, it went even further in our Blizzard culture. So we were working on Warcraft 3, and eventually we had an April Fool's where we were talking about a 5th race or something like that, or a 4th race for Warcraft 3. We thought that it would be funny, so Metzen came up with some background. I came up with a couple extra pictures for the Pandaren. They're the new race in Warcraft 3. It was the last race we were going to announce. And we're like, April Fools, everyone's going to get a kick out of this and laugh. And it was weird because everyone really liked it and said, "Oh, that'll be fantastic. Where did they come from?" We're like, "Guys, this was a joke." And a lot of people were upset that it was a joke. And a lot of people really liked it. So eventually, Warcraft 3, The Frozen Throne came around, and we made Chen Stormstout as a Pandaren Brewmaster hero for the expansion. And people really dug him. And from there on, in WoW, there was Chen's Empty Keg quest. I mean, there's just been little snippets of kind of Pandaren stuff thrown into specifically the Warcraft universe. And people have always kind of liked it. And I like to say that it almost had that kind of Boba Fett feel, where everyone really liked that character, even though he had 2 minutes of screen time and never really said anything. So Pandarans might not be as cool as Boba Fett, but they're close. And in a battle, who would win? I don't know. I don't think Chen would fall into the Sarlacc pit. Nah. Later.
So the talent system is probably one of the most significant existing gameplay mechanics that we're changing with Mists of Pandaria. And I think that one is extremely important because, looking back at it, and knowing really what we were trying to get out of it to start with, which was that we wanted every player to feel like their character of their class was a little bit different or meaningfully different than some other player of the exact same class.
The talent system was the main way you're supposed to customize your character so that your mage feels different from the other mage, standing next to you. And then you can kind of debate, oh, well, did you like this talent point or this talent point? And we were at a part of the game where whether players went PvP or PvE, their talent trees were very, very similar, maybe with a couple of points here and there that were different.
In Cataclysm, we introduced the concept of your first talent point means something. So you would get a very significant gameplay choice of, am I a shadow priest, am I a discipline priest, or am I a holy priest? And it really mattered because you got a lot of abilities that were core. And then we had restrictions in place where you had to spend a lot of points in that tree before you could branch out.
With 51 talent points going all the way deep, we realized that most of them actually weren't that interesting, that there weren't actually real choices, that by adding more and more talents and more points to spend on those talents, we still weren't really creating compelling or interesting gameplay.
There are talents in the talent tree that you have to take. And if you don't take them, it's not a sign of your character's customization. It's a broken character that is not going to be competitive or even able to do their job. If you miss an important button as a tank, you may not be able to survive a boss fight. If you miss an important button as a healer, you're just not going to be able to heal or to reproduce mana.
And after that, it was really kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And players were really just going to websites to figure out, well, what's the optimal way to play the Fury spec? Or, what's the best way to tank as a prot warrior? And so they'd go through and just fill in their talents exactly the way, some genius on the internet told them to figure it out.
So Cataclysm revamp worked okay. It kind of fixed the problems we wanted to fix a little bit. It wasn't super exciting for players. They just felt like, well, you're taking stuff away and not really giving us anything in return. And yeah, simple is better, but all of us agree, designers and players alike, that somewhere there is a really cool talent model. We just haven't hit on it yet.
So we started to think about, well, what are the fundamental problems with the talent system that got us to that point? So we really started to realize that you didn't need as many different things in there to make good choices. And in fact, in a lot of ways, having so many things in there made them so unbalanceable that they were inherently not going to be able to be a choice.
When we decided that the 51 points at trees had gotten completely out of hand a couple of years ago, we wanted to do something drastic at the time, but we weren't quite willing to take that huge step, to take that huge risk, and just pull it all out at that point in development. But for Mists, we really pretty much knew we wanted to do it from the start.
And we started to realize that, we really need to allow you to be able to make choices between talents that are apples to apples comparisons. So you'd be able to look at a talent and say, oh, well, this talent's intended to keep me alive. And I can weigh that against this other talent that's intended to keep me alive in a different way, or this other talent that's able to keep me alive in a different way. At that point, you're able to really kind of evaluate, well, I know what these talents are for, and I can really choose against them in this new talent system.
So we took that and built that out into the entire tree. By forcing 6 rows of 3 talents each, players are forced to make hard choices within each row. And we can be much more confident and comfortable in the balance within that system, within those rows. And there are actually quite a number of permutations for players to differentiate themselves from each other, far, far more than you'd ever see today. 2 arms warriors standing next to each other in Mists will be far more different from each other than 2 arms warriors standing next to each other today.
And what's more, because the system is relatively simple with only 6 tiers, we think it'll be a lot easier for players to kind of wrap their head around the total package of talents they can get and to switch them. So we really like the idea that you've been playing your rogue for a long time, you've been raiding or whatever, and your rogue's just going to play the same he always plays. So tonight, you're going to switch around some of your talents, and now your crowd control abilities, maybe your survivability buttons, maybe even some of your core rotational buttons will be a little different, which we hope will kind of keep it fresh for players.
I feel like with the new talent system, you can really dive into your character and experience some of those moments that we had 7 or 8 years ago when we first introduced the talent system, and people would argue day after day about what the spec was, because really at the time it hadn't all been figured out. And that's sort of the magic of what a talent system is supposed to bring. And that's the magic that we really believe the new talent system can bring.
We do the big dramatic thing really well, right? We blow things up better than anybody. But this one has a spirit and a humor that we haven't quite seen.
We had never really done this much comedy or martial arts before. But at the same time, we really wanted to try and make all of the actions very character-driven.
This cinematic is different in that we put a little bit more emphasis on storytelling, like a little short film.
We really tried to pull the characters into a much more immersed environment and tell a story through action.
We were trying to figure out a way that we could tell this story a little more intimately than things we've done in the past. I mean, for example, Cataclysm was just, epic, destruction, hugeness, right? This, we wanted to do something that was more character-driven.
Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, they were all very epic and serious. And this one, get some of that Warcraft humor and, lightness.
We really ended up going back to the WoW, base DNA of Warcraft 1, orcs versus humans. That seemed just a natural thing to do.
And it had a bit of a naval theme, and that's something that we just haven't done, or at least not since what is it, tides?
In so many ways, it harkens back to the first teaser we did for Warcraft 3. And it was just this sense of like this third-party agency inserting itself into our conflict. This is about red and blue, damn it, who are you? And in so many ways, the intro for Pandaria kind of echoes that, right? Red and blue just going at it, just hate. These guys are not going to have lunch later on. And then to have, Shen jump into the mix, right? Just pop, 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 kind of school them both. What an amazing full circle. The Mists of Pandaria opening is just a mile marker of how far we've come.
Yeah, this one's a little different. We are definitely reaching a little farther out of our normal purview for these kind of cinematics to sort of reach for a stylized look and feel.
This time around, we really try to put a lot of focus on the pre-production phase, trying to come up with as many design calls and exploration in the very beginning of the project.
So what we did was we had a what we call a blue sky design period of 2 weeks where we had the artists just kind of go crazy.
The idea behind it was that any artist on the team, whoever wanted to work on the stuff, they would get the basic guidelines of what the cinematic was going to be, and then they were just allowed to do whatever they want, total freeform.
Everything was okay, throwing everything in the kitchen sink, and maybe some things were really pushed, and then we might have to pull back or whatever to find the exact design that was right. We ended up with more concepts on this show out of the character, out of the set and the environment and the effects than I think any other Blizzard show that we've had.
When I was told that I would be involved in pre-production, and I came home, I was Friday night when I told my wife about this great opportunity. She's like, "Oh, we should start working right now." So she took her 5D camera, and we kind of built a costume at home from whatever we had. We took some of the stuff from the Christmas tree, from whatever we had to build some of the accessories. I'm like, it's all good. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm gonna use this as a base to make a pin over on top of it. Certain elements served as inspiration for the final characters.
I remember when we were doing our blue sky period, there was one piece that came out that really sang to me, and it was a piece that was done by one of our concept artists, Matthias Verhessel. He just did this really epic, fully fleshed out piece. You could look at a leaf and it felt like it had style and attitude, or a cloud, it's got style and attitude. And that one to me, it just, when I saw that, I'm like, okay, this is the direction we got to go. And this could be a blueprint for feeding into the design language of everything else.
Then after 2 weeks, we basically had a gallery showing, where we put all the art up on cards and we put it all around in one of our conference rooms and just invited everyone to come in, check it out. We really should have had wine and cheese. We'll do that next time. But we also had the game team come in, and with them, we started to sift through all of these ideas.
It had a lot of visual cues to what could work and what would not work at all, which is something that you always want to have a good idea for what direction you want to take.
We were looking for something that Blizzard could call a new Blizzard style, because we love to do hyper detail. What if we did that on very stylized geometry?
If we start doing realistic stuff, there's no point even, why don't we get a real human, right? We didn't want to go as styled as the game, but we wanted to find like a nice mix between the kind of realism, hyper-real type thing, and the stylistic approach that the game has.
So the geometry said, I am not a real human being. But the detail said, I am organic, I am alive.
So that brought in new challenges, as we wanted to push the detail of the characters, but at the same time keep them more dynamic and cartoony.
So then we had to go have the conversation with the game team where we said, everything else has to be like this, right? The other characters have to conform to this sort of style. The environment has to be stylized. Even our animation style, we're going to have to explore something that fits, that's maybe a little more classic animation based than some of the sort of, hyper-real, always trying for reality things that we've done with some of our other shows. And the game team was like, yes, that we agree, let's do that. Of paramount importance on this show given that it's a character piece, was that we were going to have great characters that could carry their own on screen.
In the past, we had done a lot of things where we make a choice for the sake of making something look cool. We wanted to get away from that. We wanted to have a dedicated reason for everything that we do. One of the aspects of that that's very important is to set up a series of documentation that's going to be a guideline for everyone else on the production.
We would actually try and make up a life story or make up a bio for that certain character to explain why he looks the way he looks now.
We do a full description of the character. Say, for example, the human. He's a ship's captain. He's very agile. He's kind of like a born survivor.
Someone that would try to throw dirt in your eye if that would help him win the fight.
And the guy is obviously been living on the ship for most of his life.
Suntan sort of older type of guy, a little bit past his prime.
The human character really drove the design of the show, actually. WoW itself is a very stylized game. And so we thought, let's do that. Let's design a guy that belongs in the world of Warcraft. We just knew this was a character that we could do a ton of great stuff with.
The orc is pretty funny because he's very reactive. It's reaction before thought.
This shipwreck was very personal to him, and he's upset from the beginning. A lot of his comrades had died on that ship, and he's very angry about it, and it doesn't subside really the entire time.
He's big and a little slow looking, but if he manages to land one blow, you'll probably be in some serious trouble.
And so the human tries to use that against him, and definitely the panda uses that against him.
The orc was definitely a challenging character to work on because he doesn't have clothes on, and you see his anatomy.
We had to come up with new systems to how to create muscle deformation, flexing, things that we didn't have to tackle as closely before.
And so now he looks pretty big. He communicates his presence, and he's ready to tear stuff up.
It's kind of funny, actually, because initially it wasn't going to be Chen. We were going to do 3 original characters.
We did many different versions, some younger, some like the version we like was a little wiser and older.
Kind of an emperor sort of look.
He was supposed to be kind of more grizzled, kind of a veteran type character.
The old kung fu master Pandaria that was kind of in, a little bit more tattered robes with the kind of crazier eyebrows.
But then when we go to the meeting and we are going to present the whole thing, the whole artwork, we play the animatic again.
It was, great reaction, and Samwise Didier was with us, and he saw it for the first time and said, "Oh, was that Chen? That was so cool." And we said, "Well, no, actually, we were doing 3 original characters." And he was like, "Oh, I thought it was Chen. Oh, why couldn't it be Chen?" And so we started talking about it, and ultimately it was like, well, hell yeah, why couldn't it be Chen?
Ah, greetings, my friend.
Because he was in Warcraft 3, he's the only Pandarian that I'm aware of that's traveled outside of Pandaria, that's gone to Azeroth, to other lands. So, he's an adventurer. He's a really sort of friendly guy in a way. My feeling is that after the cinematic ends, they got really drunk, all 3 of them,
Have one on the house.
We ended up taking a more stylized and exaggerated approach to the look of the film and to the look of the animation. It's kind of the same approach that like Disney has taken all the way back to the 1930s. They decided that they wanted to make something clear and entertaining.
We've got a lot of squash and stretch and very exaggerated movements, that kind of thing, starts and stops,
With the snappier timing, they were able to hold these poses longer, which would give the audience time to read their expressions.
So we kind of had to interrupt the fight for just a moment, look at their face, and then go back to the fight. We take all the emotional beats of the story and draw really detailed, really expressive facial expressions for all those moments. We call that a model sheet, and that gives us an idea if the character will work in all those different places.
We wanted their faces to have great readability and to work really well with the animation. That's something that we consciously made choices of this time, like these have to work well in animation.
Putting a layer of controls on the face so that the animators could hit those expressions was a must.
We created a new facial system for the show that actually mimics the muscles in the face, where in the past it was a much more sculptural approach.
And with Chen, the extra challenge was we were going to pile a bunch of fur on top of his face, right? So we found that we would have to push the animation farther than we normally would have. That you'd do it and you'd say, oh, that looks pretty broad. Then you'd put the fur on it and you go, where'd my animation go? We're not looking to go into the uncanny valley. We're not looking to be real, but we're looking to be truthful, right? And that's why the video reference was so important to us, was because it gave us that chance to mine for little truths, little naturalisms.
We had to take the storyboards and sort of plus it and come up with new moves that worked in actual 3D space and in live action. If it could work in live action, it would definitely work in 3D, so that was a great test.
You know, we knew we wanted to make this a cool fight. We wanted it to be fun. And we initially thought that we weren't going to be able to take care of all that business ourselves, that we might need a fight choreographer to come in and help us through some of the hard stuff. But it just dragged on long enough, the search for that person, that we got to the point where we'd shot a lot of stuff and we were having a lot of fun. You know, at some point we just kind of said, yeah, we'll just do it. We'll just finish it ourselves, you know?
We took that in and sort of distilled the performance down to its main ingredients. We figured out what were the most main important actions, what's really important gags, really important moves, and then we took everything else out.
Jeremiah Johnson is one of our modelers. He's also very good at being an orc, it turns out. He really brought a lot of the wounded pathos to the character that I was excited about.
We had him act out the shot where the orc runs into the statue. We set up a pad and we put it up against the wall, and we asked him to run into the pad as hard as he could.
He really gave it his all.
Action.
He so gave it his all, he broke one of the walls in our innocence room.
The hole in the wall was not my fault. I was just doing what I was told to do.
From an environment design standpoint of view, the cinematic more than others, we really try to go stylized a lot into what the game development team has been doing.
We had one big vista shot towards the end that was actually really fun to work on, and we started with the game geo, and we called out different landmarks that we liked in the geo, and then we started building on top of that. But what's really cool about it is you can really look at that shot, and if you're familiar with the area in the game, you can really call out like, hey, I've been there. Oh, that building exists as well. It's just in a higher fidelity form.
Previous ones, especially Cataclysm, had a lot more variations in the settings. This is quite a bit more intimate, and I think more attention has to be paid to the details in that case because you're going to see so much more of it.
We actually went out with a full camera set, and we took HDRI images of the environment supervisor, Seth, on the scene with us, dressed like the captain with the navy coat and the white shirt. And he actually dunked himself into the ocean, which is really crazy because it's super cold that morning. And we're able to shoot a lot of great footages that we can use for texturing references and also lighting references. We don't simply just take a photo and apply to the character and the environment. We actually go over with a paintbrush and do these custom paintings to make these almost more illustrative.
So everything feels really like a magical place and dreamlike in the fog and everything.
Start off very foggy, very monotone foggy things. And the challenge is to how to bring the color into that foggy environment. And at the same time become sunny like spring and everything become beautiful.
Basically, the fog, the atmosphere is almost a character. We have like a couple of different versions of the fog. There's the fog that's just sort of a ground fog through the whole cinematic, that's sort of low-lying, almost dry ice character. And then when Chen appears, he sort of has a magical connection with the fog, I guess, and he sort of swirls around himself into this sort of whirlwind.
We were even talking about potentially taking the effects more towards the game. The game's effects are very stylized.
We had the fog literally going in spirals and things like that. That turned out to be way too stylized. What we ended up with was about 20% stylistic and about 80% letting just the natural fluid dynamics laws take control.
Those little bugs you see flying around, if you zoom in, that's StarCraft 2 Zerg flying around. I happen to be working on StarCraft 2 at the same time, so I just took the same model from Mutalisks, Overseers, and Overlords, and Corruptors, and put them in the world of Warcraft.
Every show, we basically try to one-up ourselves, and with that comes unique situations and challenges that we have.
We had a new way of doing cloth on this show, and it was really exciting. It was a big step forward for us because in the past we would actually model cloth.
We moved into something called pattern-based system where we develop all the clothing just like you would develop a real piece of cloth.
They will look more real because they'll have real seams where they're supposed to.
And we even went to the garment district and bought a whole bunch of materials and compared how materials drape.
And we got a hat, and we got a lion mask that we cut up and painted to look like a panda mask.
And we shot him in different poses, and we shot how the cloth will react, how the hat will react.
So that we could see how the fabric would move when you jumped around in it.
The hair for Chen was probably the most, I'm sorry, not probably, it was the most challenging hair groom we've done to date.
We had not done that level of fur before. I think it's been tremendously successful at some great cost to poor Jeremiah, who's been placing all that hair.
The amount of hair in Olive Kane's hair groom and in Leah's hair groom all fit into this amount of space on the panda.
He had to go in and individually lay in all these follicles. I don't even know how many follicles it was, an insane number.
Like Leia, for instance, she had on the order of like 2,200 follicles. For Chen, just his head had about 33,000. This actually came up before with Cataclysm when we thought we were going to do a Worgen, and we ended up canceling the Worgen in favor of just mass destruction.
So we had like multiple hair systems that all had to be integrated on that same face. So it was a huge undertaking.
And that has been an experience. Our first initial shots of pushing the hair through the system brought down a good portion of the Blizzard campus as far as its network capability.
In general, I mean, this has been a really interesting experience for us just because of being able to do something a little bit different.
We all had to step outside our boxes of what we normally do and learn a lot of new techniques. And because of this, I think that we can even bring some of these techniques back into that hyper-realistic animation that we do on the other projects.
I like that the characters didn't take themselves too seriously, and I like that we were able to kind of build characters that showed that.
We love these characters so much. We've fallen in love with them. We hope we can do something else with them sometime because, you know, they're just so cool.
And I think that piece just absolutely encapsulates everything that we want to say, you know, about this chapter.
For my kind, the true question is, what is worth fighting for?
I think the best way that I could characterize what's really excited me about this project is that it's so different from the last one. We just came off of Cataclysm, where we had to take a world we all love and destroy it. With Pandaria, we have almost a return to the wonder of discovering a new place.
To introduce a land of peace and beautiful characters and characters that have wisdom and insight is really nice to work on because it really couldn't come at a more appropriate time.
With this expansion, I really feel like we're giving
the players, something that I know that they want to see. The race, the characters, the zones expanded upon. That just feels awesome because to me, it feels like a slam dunk. I can't help but like it.
The game has been out for quite a while, and so there's a lot of people who really know what the sound of WoW is. And so I think the most difficult thing is to make sure that every sound that you put in there actually fits into the world.
So with that comes an extremely large amount of content and a large responsibility for all of us to tell the story well, fluidly, and beautifully.
As is everything at Blizzard, it's a team effort, and it's been just a really rewarding process.
So there's three main components that sound is usually thinking about going into a game. We have the sound design, the VO, and the music.
Well, as always, the game itself is our number one inspiration. And it starts with the concept art, it starts with the lore. It's all provided a backdrop for our musical storytelling.
So when our composers are preparing to record music for a game, they do a concept session, not unlike concept art.
In trying to come up with what the palette would be, if you will, for the music, we made a few assumptions early on. And one of those was that we wanted an Asian overlay, but wanted to maintain this sense of a film score style, an epic feeling that permeates the rest of Azeroth.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the levels, the areas that the players were going to be walking around in, and it was just gorgeous. And I immediately got ideas as to what I wanted to do, to try to kind of create a whole new world sonically to go with the visual.
We listened to film scores, we listened to things that we liked, and among them, there was a mini-series called Wild China that was very influential to us.
The Last Emperor, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero.
The Last Samurai was an excellent example. I mean, there's Hans Zimmer really successfully melded in all these authentic instruments.
As far as the instruments go and where we found out about them, a lot of the stuff I had heard in other music, but I hadn't actually worked with the instruments before.
The way we used instruments from a Chinese heritage was to just help us add that overlay, that feel on top of the Warcraft sound that made it specific to Pandaria. So we learned a lot about not only how to write for those specific instruments, but how to be more agile and flexible in terms of thinking differently in our writing.
So there was a lot of research involved and understanding the ranges of the instruments and what sounded best with them.
For the Erhu, the pipa, the guzhong, and the dizi, they have certain limitations which are not limitations at all. It's just the way the instrument has been. And so you've got us movie score fans writing from, the lowest low to the highest high, make it soar. Yeah, this instrument doesn't play those notes.
So it was a lot of fun to dive into it and learn about them.
Melding that Asian overlay of instrumentation with a Western writing style is sometimes a bit of a challenge to make that fit.
We've been recording with the Northwest Symphonia and Chorus in Seattle since the Burning Crusade. It's a great experience, it's a great orchestra.
We record the music in this deconsecrated chapel that's now part of a university. So it has a architecture that's got a lot of stone and a lot of wood. The ceiling is 62 feet tall, I believe. So it's a very reverberant space. There's a lot of character that's added to the recording from the room itself.
The best part of the process is getting to hear the orchestra play the music for the first time. Been slaving over it for months. And finally you get there and hear everyone play it, and it's just the best part because it takes it so much further.
Since it was once a chapel, my connection is that it's an old sound. It's a sound that I think is as timeless as we want World of Warcraft to be.
So one of the main components of the music is the choral element.
Along with the orchestra, we recorded a 32-voice choir We record the choir 3 times to give the effect of 96 voices, but with each successive pass, we use microphones that are further away, which adds a depth and detail without losing clarity.
Sometimes when we record, we record things in sections, so we're able to isolate certain things, certain sounds. Not quite a traditional approach, it's not like you would record classical music, but in our case, just because we're approaching it a little differently, a little bit different of a sound, we'll tend to record things in different sections.
There's a process towards the end of the musical project for any of the games, and that is the final mix. That's all the tracks, and they all come together, and it's all got to feel like the Warcraft universe. The mixing process is the last step and the last opportunity to adjust for that. One of the things that's really helped me in doing this part of the project is I work closely with the sound designers.
We put a lot of effort and time into the sound design, which goes into the games.
The World of Warcraft design team does come to us and give us direction and input on how they want their game to sound.
The collaboration process with sound and the game teams is very organic, very creative.
We didn't really have any restraints in the sound design.
I think they kind of leave it up to us to let us work our creative magic, and then we'll put it in the game, and hopefully everyone's happy with it.
Typically, we start with the ambience. It's kind of the base coat for a zone and for an area. Kind of sets the mood and the immersion.
These sounds never stop. It's the one part of the soundtrack that is always playing.
With the ambiences this time around, because again, they're farmers and masons and jewelers, we wanted all of Pandaria, the new zones in the expansion, to sound like something that you would hear on a really awesome vacation, essentially.
I tried to add a lot of calming wind and water. It's just about in everything, because this expansion is very calming. Everything about it's not so in your face and aggressive as especially our last one.
A lot of the ambiences were actually built from scratch, so they weren't recorded from one location, but they were sort of comprised of a lot of sounds.
We don't have any bamboo forests in Irvine, and so we contacted people that had those resources and then utilized those recordings in our own design for Mists of Pandaria.
Got to go to botanical gardens and record some of their waterfalls, some of their exotic birds, and then just essentially build kits from that.
Flavor kits within the ambience itself. And what it allows us to do is actually have unique one-shot sounds play at random distance at random times. An example of how we would use this is take the hose and monkey sounds, put them through reverb processing, make them sound like they're far off in the distance.
Each one of the classes sort of has its own sonic identity. Part of the process was to keep the sound design specifically for the monk class as visceral and as organic as possible.
The fighting style of the monk is very different than some of the other classes, and we really spent a lot of time trying to make them feel unique and different.
So we did a huge Foley session. We did swishes, whooshes, whirls, anything that had a martial arts characteristic to it.
We took the sound of their clothing and added it to the actual movements and attacks.
Even though they're a leather-wearing class, that's sort of the characteristic that makes martial arts movies really exciting. You hear that cloth, when someone throws a punch, you hear that kung fu kind of snappy sound. A lot of times when we're designing a sound, the actual real-world equivalent of that sound doesn't work. So sometimes you have to pull, from other sources to kind of embellish. We went to the grocery store and bought a ton of, vegetables and fruit.
We did a Foley session with some vegetables. Pretty much just kind of smashed them against each other and kind of grind them against each other. And we got these interesting squeaks and rips and tears.
Where we took a head of cabbage and ripped each leaf, and it sounded like electricity. That ended up being the main layer for the Crackling Jade Lightning. That same session got us a good palette of source to use for the monk impacts. 2 cabbage heads banging together, make for some really great sounding body blows. We used cabbage a lot.
And you throw that together with some animals, and then you get a really unique individual sound for the game.
The monk class is fun, and that's what we're trying to convey.
Forget injuries. Never forget kindnesses.
It's been quite a challenge for Mr. Pandaria, casting-wise, to find voices. I need to find talking fish people, talking tigers, talking serpents, talking praying mantis, talking rabbits, talking yaks.
We did something a little different in this expansion that, to my knowledge, we haven't done in the past, is we actually got a lot more VO actors to come in and perform it.
One of the things that we benefited from for sound design was that actually the project went SAG. And so we were able to get some voice talent to actually do some vocalizations for some of our creatures.
I feel that going SAG on Mists of Pandaria has definitely changed the dynamic of how we work.
And it's really allowed us to make some of the creatures and some of the characterizations through voice more interesting and better in this expansion than we've seen in the past.
We're really blessed and fortunate. It makes our jobs easier that we have such good material to work with to kind of hone into making these creatures.
So when choosing the sound for a character, we do a lot of pre-planning. For example, we'll have a race called Jinyu, which are the talking fish people. So we will get together and identify who are these people? Who are they both as a race? What do they represent? How does a talking koi fish fight?
That way, when it comes time to bring the voice actors in, we can kind of give them, okay, this is what the team is thinking.
But then once our specs hit the actors, a whole new level comes into it because we start with what we want in our head, but really not until you get that perfect fish person in the booth do you get the true beauty and inner workings of your fish people.
We kind of let them bring their acting ability and their techniques to the session, and then let them kind of like go for it, and we kind of steer them onto target until we actually define the voice, and we go, oh, that's it, that's perfect.
I think one of the most amazing actors I got to work with so far is our actor Keone Young, who plays Chen Stormstout.
The true question is, what is worth fighting for?
Chen Stormstout is a very important character because he alone really represents all that's beautiful and wonderful about the Pandaren. Keone is an amazing actor who's been in the industry for a very long time. His Asian background and his Asian culture really breathed life into Chen Stormstout. That was amazing.
Why would I want to feel skinny? Size is strength.
Beautiful. Great, Keone, moving right along to line 22. So to us, we're working with that actor and bringing Chen Stormstout to life really came together in a way that we didn't expect. It was really fun to get this robust, interesting, funny, warm, powerful character created right in front of us with Keone's help.